The term documentary was coined in 1926 by John Grierson, who is often referred to as the father of British documentary. He would go on to spearhead the documentary movement of the 1930s and play a crucial role in defining documentary filmmaking as we know it today. Often neglected from this narrative are his two sisters, Ruby and Marion, who were just as active in the production of documentary films at the time. In fact, during the 30s and 40s, hundreds of non-fiction films were produced by a vast array of female filmmakers, who made up a larger portion of the film industry than ever before. But this would be short-lived. Just a few years later, work by women directors would all but disappear. These women are under-recognised and often left out of film histories altogether, but their contributions to non-fiction filmmaking played a vital role in shaping documentary films into what they are today.
We estimate that we have around 25,000 hours of film and video. It's a real mixture of training films, amateur films, official unedited films, features, and it covers material from Britain and all over the world. I think the content of the Imperial Museum, you wouldn't necessarily associate that with female filmmakers or even portrayals of women on screen, but it's something that's always interested me in our collection, maybe because it wasn't always so well documented. Well, there were a handful of women working in Britain in production before the war, but not very many, and most women were in what were seen as quite traditional female roles, working in makeup, costume, continuity, what they were called continuity girls, and also in the cutting room.
Women producing non-fiction films at this time were almost exclusively wealthy, amateur filmmakers who could afford the equipment. Travelogues were a common form of non-fiction filmmaking. Essentially early home movies, these films would document the filmmakers' experiences on trips all around the world.
Over a period of time, I've done quite a lot of research into Rosie Newman, her filmmaking, her family background. In 1928, when she was in her early 30s and unmarried, she decided to take up what was then the latest amusing hobby, which was cinematography. And at that point, she went to the leading London retailer, Wallace Heaton, and bought a 60mm camera. She started filming her family and friends and some local events. She took her camera on her holiday to Morocco, and from that made her very first film, Morocco 1928. After Morocco, she continued to travel and made many visits to Europe, and again took her camera with her. Her next trip in 1935 was to India with her mother as the guest of the Viceroy of India. For this trip, she bought 60mm Caldecott stock. During her 2-month tour, she filmed extensively in India, and when she came home, she made 2 films, one called Glimpses of India and the other Further Glimpses of India. She began to show them in private homes, hotels, the Royal Geographic Society, the East India Association. At this point, she was a well-respected amateur filmmaker.
In the 30s, documentaries were increasingly tackling social and societal subjects.
The documentary movement, the name that's usually quoted is John Grierson, who's been called the father of the documentary movement, and he and colleagues had a very well-developed sort of social conscience and made films that were quite liberal, quite left-leaning, and they were very interested in filming real people, not using actors, but filming real people in real locations. So Housing Problems was made in 1935.
This film is going to introduce you to some of the people really concerned. First, Councillor Lauder, chairman of the Stepney Housing Committee, will tell you something of the problem of slum clearance.
Housing Problems was actually the first film that Ruby Grierson worked on, although she's not credited.
Housing Problems was a huge turning point for documentary filmmaking, as one of the first films to give a voice to its subjects through the use of interviews, a technique which is now synonymous with today's most popular documentary films. Ruby Grierson played a vital role in capturing these interviews, reportedly putting the subjects at ease and allowing them to open up to the camera. The camera is yours, the microphone is yours, now tell the bastards exactly what it's like to live in the slums.
So our little black dog kept running about, so I must have dozed off with the baby. Thinking it was a dog on my head, I looked up, instead of that it was a big rat. I screamed and ran out and left the baby.
It's regarded that it really was, the success was really due to her. She had a real affinity with ordinary people, with working class people, and it was quite groundbreaking to be able to go into some of this slum housing and interview women in their own home, describing the kind of awful conditions.
Under John Grierson, the documentary movement would give many women previously stuck in technical roles opportunities to direct for themselves. Newsreels were one of the most widely produced forms of non-fiction films around this time. They consisted of observational journalistic footage coupled with voiceover explaining what was being shown on screen.
The gun carriage on which lay the coffin was escorted by guards from the Senate and Chamber of Deputies, as befitted the memory of the dead statesman, so long associated with Egyptian parliamentary life.
Educational films were also popular. Mary Field was a filmmaker who pioneered educational films in the late 20s and early 30s. As the Second World War broke out, the need for both these types of film would increase dramatically, and many filmmakers from the documentary movement would begin making informational and propaganda films.
Once war was declared, documentary filmmaking was only a reserved occupation for men over 30, so a lot of younger men working in documentary filmmaking were called up, so this did provide some opportunities for women to work as producers and directors. The Ministry of Information had censorship control over all films that went out during the war, whether they were newsreels, feature films, documentaries, so it realised that it had a kind of captive audience in the cinemas and that this was the best way to get the messaging across. There was a move to make what we call the information shorts, so films of maybe 5-10 minutes long where you could really get across a single message. And this might be, for example, how to use your rationing coupons or how to deal with an incendiary firebomb if it dropped into your house. There would have been a whole programme including a short, a newsreel and the feature film, and this was kind of on a continuous programme. You could go into the cinema at any time, you didn't just have to wait for the beginning.
Food shortages created by the war meant the public had to be educated on things like growing their own vegetables and alternative ways to prepare food. Non-fiction films were a great way to do this.
Margaret Thompson made Making a Compost Heap for the Ministry of Agriculture. The film really is exactly as the title says. It's just a very, very short film, 4 or 5 minutes, just looking very methodically at the best way to use the garden waste to build up a compost. And it's very simple and very effective.
With Making a Compost Heap, you could say Margaret Thompson made an early example of a how-to video, still a common form of non-fiction filmmaking, now seen in today's YouTube tutorials.
Choose Cheese was made by Ruby Grierson, and this is a good example. Obviously, there was meat was rationed. Contains lots of claims of how children eating cheese would grow taller than children who didn't eat cheese. So some perhaps now some scientific claims that wouldn't quite stand up, but it's a really appealing film.
At the end of a year, the two groups were compared, and it was found that for every inch the meat-eating group had grown, the cheese-eating group had grown 1.25 inches. And you can see from these children that far from there being a loss of health, there is an actual gain.
So they also starts, as I say, with this tribute to the housewives of Britain. It's all done with a very quiet dignity that Ruby Grierson gave the people in the film, and it just shows a few hours in the day of this woman who's unnamed. So it's a very kind of quiet, reflective look at ordinary people just trying to get on with coping with these wartime conditions.
You can see why the female perspective might resonate with women more than the newsreels of the time.
Just as these girls of another technical unit knew more about a Spitfire than their mothers knew about a cooking stove.
Rosie Newman was determined to make a film record of Britain during wartime, and she also had the support of the Ministry of Information, who gave her kind of letters of support that she could use. She obtained permits to film in London, covering the London Blitz, army on manoeuvres in Hampshire, and most remarkably on board HMS Berkeley out of Portsmouth, which was really unheard of, a female amateur filmmaker on board ship. She continued to film and edit her film. So she added scenes and took scenes away. She changed the title. The film that we have and we consider Britain at War is a 1946 version. But say there's an earlier version, England at War, and there was Britain throughout the war. There were various different versions. Most amateur films record the cameraman's own environment and experience. Rosie Newman was able to use her influence and environment and connections to get access to places that most amateur filmmakers would not be allowed to go. And it's this combination of access and the breadth and the colour material that makes her film so remarkable.
Rosie Newman gave us some of the best colour footage of the Second World War known to exist, and her approach to filming these situations created a unique perspective not captured in any other newsreel or war film.
Although some female filmmakers did continue with their roles after the war, there were a few factors which meant that there weren't as many women working in these roles as perhaps there would have been otherwise. Changes in the film business, also television becoming more popular, sort of from the early 50s onwards, so fewer films were being made of this sort. And also changing attitudes to women, although women's work was obviously very much encouraged when it was needed. Attitudes after the war, which were quite prevalently suggesting that women, you've done your bit in the war, now come back, be a housewife, have children, stay at home. And there had been some resentment across all industries of women working during the war, even though they were paid less than men were for doing equivalent roles. But also there were quite sexist and misogynistic attitudes at leading film studios after the war, and Michael Balcon, the head of the studios, said that a female director would never be able to control a male crew. So those kind of attitudes really did, prevent a lot of women being able to make more successful careers in this area.
The 30s and 40s was a unique period where female filmmakers were able to stand out and make their voices heard, but so many of these films and their directors are unrecognised and unknown today. Techniques and approaches pioneered by these women have had a huge impact on filmmaking as we know it today. They offered a different perspective to the male-dominated films of the time, and it's important to recognise the entire history of non-fiction filmmaking.
I think some of these women film directors were quite neglected after the war, and the documentary movement under John Grierson in particular seemed to have been something of a boys' club, and some research has been done into Ruby and her sister Marion, who is also a documentary filmmaker, but there is nowhere near like the amount of information or the legacy for Ruby and Marion as there was for John. But that is changing, and there are many researchers rightly looking into this now and trying to give them their place back in the history of the documentary film movement.
Ruby Grierson died in 1940 whilst making a film about the evacuation of British children to Canada. Her death had a significant impact on her brother, the father of British documentary. Remembering her, John Grierson recalled how she challenged his own approach to filmmaking, saying, "The trouble with you is that you look at things as though they were in a goldfish bowl. I'm going to break your goldfish bowl."